If we look at the ideas about the Isaiah scroll, we have to remember that these things go back to 1947. How many of you were alive in 1947? Not too many. But you know, I think it is kind of important to imagine that what we're seeing here at the time we saw it was very important prophetically. And we know how we have wrestled with the idea that this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. Well, if you're looking for a starting point, I would think this would be one of the key starting points to think about. What happened when the Isaiah scroll was discovered? Now, I want to talk about the vindication of Yahweh, the God of the Bible. In these talks, it'll be prime in all of my talks to talk about the vindication. That is showing God to be right and being able to think through things to the point where that is important to you. For a lot of people stopped somewhere along the road and never got to the point of ever thinking about what the impact should be upon witnessing what they were seeing. And of course, you really can't do that until you open the scroll and look at what it says. And this verse in Isaiah chapter 8 has been a very significant verse for Bible students for a long time. It says, "To the law and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, it is because there's no light in them." And that's one of the reasons why when we go to talk to people about the Bible and they start quoting things that are not found in the Bible, we find a real fault with that. And yet if we stay with the Bible, we don't come up with a multitude of ideas. We come up with God's plan. We come up with something that is always compatible with other verses, and it becomes the way to interpret things, comparing spiritual with spiritual, seeing how the Old Testament and the New Testament are related, seeing how the idea of the God of the Old and the God of the New, if we ever wanted to, talk about it that way, they are the same God. This doesn't come from the reasoning of men or the reasoning of, the very high echelon people who want to, make rules for their people and rules for generations to come. It comes from Bible students, people who are just able to open their Bible and read it. God didn't make the Bible for people that were wise like that. He speaks against the wisdom of the world so often. It is really comforting to think of how many times he just wants people to open their book and read it and compare it. So a lot of the things that we initially saw in the Shrine of the Book were not very comforting. I hope that in this set of talks that you will be able to recognize the hand of God in the discovery of the scrolls and certain things that have happened afterwards. But I would like you most of all to feel the sensation of the discovery. Now, that's always a hard thing to portray, and it's a hard thing to grasp. So it won't be easy to convey the feeling that was there at the time of these events. But if you don't get the feeling, you don't really see the impact that I think was intended for it to have upon people's minds. I want to just share with you, apart from Isaiah, just this little event that's found in the New Testament. It's experiencing a miracle and what God, and in this particular case, the Lord Jesus Christ, expected from the people who saw it, who felt it, who were the recipients of the miracle. Now, you'll know this very well. Luke 17, I'll just read this for you. So when he saw them, he said to them, and this is the lepers, the 10 lepers that came to Jesus and they wanted to be cleansed. He said, "Go show yourselves to the priests." Well, they were still lepers. He hadn't cleansed them at that time. And so it was, it says, that as they went, they were cleansed. And one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned and with a loud voice glorified God and fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And he was a Samaritan. So Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? And where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner? Now you get a feeling around just that little clip from 3 verses in Luke 17, that these people were healed on the way to the priest. When they turned away from Jesus, they weren't healed. And so somewhere along the route, they all recognized the leprosy was gone. And only one person who was not connected directly with Israel, because he was a foreigner, he would be the Samaritan. I got to go back, and I just got to thank this man for what he's done for me. That's feeling. That's being impacted, not just mentally, but letting your whole being realize what's happened and doing something about it. Isn't it amazing that 9 people were healed and didn't even think about going back? I tend to think that that's the way we normally react, brothers and sisters and young people and, Bible students. We don't normally take it in that deeply. We intellectually say, oh, yes or no, or maybe even just question how it happened, or one day I'll think about it. But one man turned back to give thanks. He was the one who was fully impacted by what had happened. Now, that's what we don't want to miss with the Dead Sea Scrolls. I believe there was a miracle involved in this, and I hope to be able to show you that so that you feel the same way at the end of this. Now, this is the way I like to go through it. There really are 6 classes for this. We're only going to go through 3 of them. I think you'll have had enough of me after 3 classes, so you'd be glad to have somebody else at the 4th class. And we'll pick up, Lord willing, some other time. If not, hopefully these will all be on YouTube. So I'd like to spend today just on this idea of excitement and disappointment about the Dead Sea Scrolls. On the 2nd class, I'd like to talk about Yahweh and Isaiah. You have the God involved, you have the prophet involved. Both of them had very worthy credentials. As we find in the book, we don't find this with the miracle. The credentials are found in the book. You've got to look at what was found and see inside. Well, you can see many people will say, well, we already had the book of Isaiah. There wasn't any new discovery, really. You just found an earlier one. And that's the way our mind quite often works. But if you link what was found with the time it was found and the way it was found, you see a bigger picture than what most people do. And here is the disappointment. Now, a lot of these things are found really in an exciting way in the book of Isaiah. What God has in mind for Israel is exciting. But what Israel made of that, the discovery of the scroll, meant that they were just blind to it. They just didn't make it. And I'll show you that, Lord willing, in today's class. Christendom is confused. Well, Christendom, you see, got themselves into a position where they weren't really sure that Israel mattered at all to God anymore. And some of them taught that it didn't, that Israel was just a normal nation. God had put them away because of what they did to his son. But there's a real story there. And there's a story about secular society, because what I'm going to do with that class, Lord willing, is deal with the response of the United Nations, the nations of the world, how they responded, because it was a simultaneous miracle of what was happening in that group at the same time. And then I want to spend a class just on Yahweh will be vindicated in the many places that he has said and talked about what he will do in the book of Isaiah. So let's just spend a little time on these scrolls and see what, in fact, it has to say about them. When you go to the shrine of the book, you see that when you get inside. That is the number 1 exhibit. And it's the exhibit of the Isaiah scroll. And they have wrapped the scroll, not the original one that was found, but one that is a copy of it. They have wrapped it around the outside so you can look at all the chapters. You can see how it was sewed together. You can see comments that were made. You can see little places where something is crossed out and there's something else written in. And this was a real life book. It was used by people. It was used at the time of Jesus' ministry, and possibly quite a few years before that. So it was really significant to find something that old and to check it out to see how it measured up with what we had. And so there you have the Isaiah scroll, and there's just all kinds of pictures around and things that show you what the scroll looked like. But there are very few things that ever talk about what the scroll said, what was revealed in it. What was revealed to the people who were actually opening the scroll at that time? There was a special message for those people. And because they never stopped to look at the scroll, what it said, they missed it. We don't want to be doing that with what God puts before our eyes to show us the exact message that he has in mind. Now, this picture is a picture of a man rappelling down a cliffside to go into a cave. This is far more recent than 1947 because they're still looking for caves. They're still looking for scrolls that may be there. And this one, they sort of wondered how anybody could ever get into it. It's called the Cave of Horrors because there were skeletons in there of people that must have died at the time that the scrolls were in there. And the skeletons were found, and they were, just as old as the scrolls were. So it was pretty rough going through that. But there were 12 caves in all where they were collecting these fragments. There were 19,000 fragments. Now you can see how thorough they wanted to be. Like, if you told your children to clean up the basement and there were 19,000 pieces of paper down there, how many do you think they would actually collect and put in garbage bags? Like, people give up after a while and say, well, we don't really need any more. Now, they got every one they could find, as small as they could find them. There were 800 scrolls. At least the fragments came from 800 scrolls, 200 of which were biblical. There were 4 materials involved: the skin of animals, papyrus, copper, and lead. There were 4 languages: the ancient Hebrew script, a more modern Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. They were discovered between 1947 and 2021. I wouldn't have said that 2 years ago or 3 years ago because the one that was discovered recently was quite significant. Then dated as between 1900 and 2,200 years old. Like, there's nobody disagrees with that. It's not a matter of saying, well, that's the view of some people, not all. No, that's using the methods that people like to judge age by. And they were subject to destruction. Obviously, in some cases, somebody went in there into what may have been a library and just with blunt instruments or maybe even a sword just smashed everything. So there were all these bits and pieces on the bottom of the cave. In other cases, they were just subject to decay, laying out there for 2,000 years. What would be left? And then closure in the sense that, they were lost. No one ever found them. So the acquisition of the first Isaiah scroll was very exciting. And you would have to read the books. There are several books being written about this to illustrate detail after detail of how this happened. And this man, Professor Sukenik, was the one who first received the scrolls. Like, there were Bedouins who found the scrolls. They didn't know what they were, had no idea. They took them to an antiquities dealer. He looked at them, and he didn't know what they were. So everybody at that stage thought, well, these probably are frauds. Like, there's probably not anything really valuable. They may have been placed there just hoping for someone to find them, then they could, collect the money involved. So that idea was really strong at first. But this man, Professor Sukenik, was the person who was given them to see what they said and to give an idea of how old they were. Well, now that really went on because that was the situation in Jerusalem at the time that he received them. Like, this was just on the verge of Israel proclaiming themselves as a nation. And the Arabs were ready to attack them. And the British were still there. And the city was divided into four, just like it is now, the old city, into four groups. And barbed wire was between them, and you couldn't get through unless you had a special pass. This is what was written up by Yahweh, his son. He said the British security forces had recently divided the city into military zones, each marked off with a barbed wire barrier and guarded by sentries. Movement from one zone to another was possible only with an official pass, and neither my father nor his Armenian friend had one. So they arranged to meet at the barrier dividing their two zones, and the whole momentous conversation was carried on across a barbed wire fence. Now, what the antiquities dealer did, he brought a little piece of the scroll, and he was sort of dangling it through the barbed wire, and this professor was supposed to say what he thought about it. And he couldn't really make much of it, but they bargained at this time, so late before the war broke out, they bargained that they would meet again, and he would get a pass to get through to talk and to receive these scrolls from the antiquities dealer. So it was really quite a fascinating story to read it. Now, this is Yigal, and this is the son of Sukenik, and he was a very highly respected archaeologist and official in Israel. His greatest joy was archaeology, the science in which he obtained a PhD, so he probably loved it. He served as the chief of the staff in Israel's military, so he was very high in the military command, being the chief, and he served for a time as Israel's deputy prime minister. Now, he was the person who was given the responsibility to discover the caves and what was in them before the Bedouin got any more. And so he set about in 1947 to look at any cave that they could find and go in the cave and see if there were any of these scrolls, because at that particular stage, when he started that off, they believed that these were valuable. Now, this is what Yigal said. Now, I want you to try to remember this, the gist of this. I don't expect you to remember the quote, but he said, "I cannot avoid the feeling that there is something symbolic in the discovery of the scrolls and their acquisition at the moment of the creation of the state of Israel. It is as if these manuscripts had been waiting in caves for 2,000 years, ever since the destruction of Israel's independence, until the people of Israel had returned to their home and regained their freedom. This symbolism is heightened by the fact that the first three scrolls were bought by my father for Israel on the 29th of November, 1947, the very day on which the United Nations voted for the recreation of the Jewish state in Israel after 2,000 years. And to give you a little insight as to where we're going with this, there was one other thing they didn't recognize, was that the scroll they found told them about the creation of Israel. They would come back from captivity. They'd be back in their land. Never mentioned. And never mentioned. Like, I went through this place, the scroll, or the shrine of the book, rather, and there was no mention of that. And I thought, this is a real oversight. These are the people of the book. They found this book. Yes, they had it before, but to discover this book at that particular time, when the nations of the world have said it's okay to divide the land so Israel would have a home, is just too much of God's making to overlook it and to see it as just a normal, occasion and not make much of it. Well, the people were excited. There was no doubt about that. You can see the little clip there of the Palestine Post, partition approved by more than 2/3, 33 to 13. And the next day, November 30th, the people were out in the streets just rejoicing. And you can understand why they would be rejoicing. A lot of these people would have a very fresh memory of the Holocaust at that particular time, of what they had gone through. and of the very difficult time of getting to Israel. These were people in Tel Aviv at that time. So there was excitement, no question about that. Now, if we just have a look at this a little slower and look at the two miracles involved. So after 2,000 years, on November 29th, 1947, the United Nations voted to divide the land. If that was on the agenda today, do you think the United Nations would pass it? Never. There wouldn't be anything close to a 2/3 majority. There would probably be 2/3 or far more against it. There was a little window of time when the nations must have felt in their conscience, these people need to be given an opportunity to have their own land. But maybe a lot of them thought that they would be demolished by the Arabs because the Arabs were rising up against them. So it was a very significant thing, and more as you study it a little more. But to have that happen at the very night that they decided that this scroll, because one of the scrolls that he looked at, there was 3 of them, and 2 of them were non-biblical, but the one that was biblical was an Isaiah scroll. It wasn't the most significant Isaiah scroll, but it was the scroll of Isaiah, which was discovered when referred to it on that particular night. Because he'd bought the 3 of the scrolls from the antiquities dealer, and he had learned that he had others. But the antiquities dealer only put 3 up for sale, obviously seeing what he would get for it. And if he didn't get enough, he'd offer it to somebody else. Do you know what he did? He had to decide this on a weekend. And all his counterparts at the university were all away. He really didn't have anybody to consult with about what to do. He was totally alone. So he thought about this, and he looked at it, and he said, yeah, I really think in my heart these are genuine, because he surely didn't want to be paying money for something that was a fake. Many people have gone down that road even since. So he went to see if he could get a loan on his house, or some kind of a mortgage on his house. And he got £1,500, which isn't much, but £1,500 satisfied the antiquities dealer, and he bought the scrolls. And then he had to sort of face the music as to whether he had bought fakes or whether he bought something real. It was only a little later on, though, that he was convinced these are genuine, as were other people who saw them. So that he got quite a bargain for just that little bit of money he had to play. So we look at it as Bible students, and we would say, okay, now, you could look at this as just coincidence. All right, there's a number of coincidences that happen around the world and even in our own life where we say, I'm not too sure to how I can account for these things happening together, but what do you make of it? Well, a scroll of Isaiah is placed in a jar in this cave sometime while the land of Israel was being destroyed by the Roman armies. They wanted to protect the scroll and others, so they put them in this cave, and they were hidden from view. And I'd have no idea whether they ever thought that they would be in that cave for that long, but interestingly enough, they were, and they were preserved to the point that they could read them, or at least read what was left. So 2,000 years passed without the scroll being discovered or disturbed. Now, the scroll that they found, or the scrolls, was in a cave that was open. It was not so open that you could see the scrolls if you looked there. It was a cave that I'm not too sure. I'd never looked in the cave, never even actually found the cave. We looked for it, we couldn't find that cave. But the story goes that a young Arab shepherd threw a stone through that opening, and because he was trying to chase a goat out of where he thought the goat was. And he heard something break, and he thought, well, after we find the goat, we're going to go back and find out what broke in there, because there's something in there that wouldn't normally be in there. And that's how they discovered, that's the story of how they discovered the scrolls. So then, while one of the main prophecies in the scroll was being fulfilled, it was rediscovered in 1947. Now, that's the link that a lot of people wouldn't know, except, Yagaliadin, he did recognize that. He said, there's something symbolic in this. This is really unusual for these 2 events to occur at one time. I think and I hope you do, and maybe if you don't, you will, that this is the evidence of the touch of the divine hand. Now, you could have time to think that through. If you don't have time to think it through, you just fall into the same basket that everybody else does. God provided something for people to think it over, what it really means. Here we are, so far removed from these events that we look at thousands of years have gone by. And yet God is still alive. God doesn't die. He's still out there. He knows all these things. He made these prophecies, and he's actually telling people in our day and generation that it's coming to pass. People are too busy. Because to sit and really think something through, you got to have quiet. You got to have the desire to do so. Sometimes you might even have to leave your house and go somewhere where you can just be with your thoughts and think it through. What does this really mean? What's the significance of this? That's what I think so often is missing. So there's critical timing. Now, this is, just go through this kind of quickly. If anyone wants to make a comment at the end or a question, I'll be glad to try to answer them. When you think of when they were found, it was quite significant. If they had been found 1,000 years ago, I doubt very much would have been made of them because people wouldn't have been able to read them. But when they were found, they were able, but only in 1993, to have technology to be able to read scrolls that couldn't show to the naked eye there was any writing. They look at it, there's nothing on that scroll. They'll discard it. No, just before you discard it, try this new technology of infrared light, and now you can see there is some writing on there. So that was really quite a useful revelation. But 1993, the DNA analysis, you get 19,000 fragments. How do you ever put them together? Well, because they were written on animal skins or papyrus, something that was living, they could tell by DNA which plant or which skin it was, primarily skins. So they collected them in groups based on the DNA analysis, and then could say, well, all these pieces must have come from the same animal. They must be the same book, or what the scribe was working on. And that way they could collect them into books so they knew where they came from and piece them together to even find out which book it was and maybe what chapter it was. And then just to deal with the issue of, no, this could just be somebody trying to make some money, and the whole thing is a big fake. Well, carbon-14 is the symbol that most scientists would use to determine the age of something that was a few thousand years old. And they dated it to be about 2,000, maybe 2,100 years old. But that didn't come to 1950. So why would the discovery of these scrolls be of any use to anybody if they'd been found before these dates? And there's one other I'm going to tell you about a little later on that was found, and there was another technology needed, and they didn't have this technology until, 2020? You see, it's still happening. It's still unraveling before our eyes, and we don't want to miss the evidence and the implications of it. I want to show you in this little sequence here, which just goes through a few minutes, what God has been able to do in the past to illustrate how God works with time. So in Genesis 24, you will remember this event. It's very common for us to read this. It's quite an interesting, very satisfying story. It's about Abraham's servant who went to find a wife for Abraham's son. And he must have been educated somewhat by Abraham about this God that he was going to pray to. So he prayed to God and he said, "Let it be that the young woman to whom I say, 'Please let down your pitcher that I may drink.' And she says, 'Drink, and I will also give your camels a drink. Let her be the one you have appointed for your servant Isaac. And by this I will know that you have shown kindness to my master." How many women would you be able to ask that of today? That you take them to your farm and you say, would you give me a drink? And they'd be glad to give you a drink, and they'll give water to all your camels. I think that was a lot to ask. But he wanted to be sure. It seems like he didn't know what to do if this kind of thing did not happen. And so in verse 15, it happened before he had finished speaking that, behold, there was Rebekah coming into view. Now that just so convinced this man that he had to stop and thank God, pray to God right there. He was impacted by the miracle that would happen before his eyes. He wasn't so busy. He wasn't just going to make sure that all these things were taken care of legally and he'd be able to take the one before he thanked God. He thanked God right then because he felt the miracle. And that's what we've got to do, I think, when we witness these kinds of things, is to not forget to thank God at the very opening of the miracle. Now you think about crossing the Red Sea and the critical timing that God showed at that particular time. So as we look at the events, the water of the sea is divided before the eyes of the people of Israel. Now that'd be quite a significant miracle to see, with nothing looking like it's doing it, the water's just dividing. And what it's doing is it's making a pathway right through the sea. And it speaks of it as being dry, and the people were able to walk through it. The whole nation safely walked through the dry land and got to the other side. And just at the right time, because God was holding Pharaoh off with darkness. And when there was light and he could see what Israel was doing, it seems that they said, well, if they can go through the Red Sea on dry ground, so can we. And away they went, because they were just driven by the passion of capturing these people and bringing them back to Egypt. But God, at the right time, when they were in the right position, brought the waters back to drown them all. And the record would suggest to us there wasn't any Israelis that doubted what God had done. They sang praises on the other side and thanked God for that great deliverance. They wouldn't see the Egyptians anymore. But as you read the record, it's not long before they forgot it all and were acting like they'd never seen this miracle. See, what is it about us that we can't maintain the feeling? We can't maintain what we witness so strongly and acknowledge just a few days afterwards. Maybe in some cases just a few hours afterwards. That's something that every one of us, I think, have got to watch, that we don't allow ourselves just to acknowledge something and believe it and say it's true, we want to do this, and then a couple days afterwards, you can't even really think of what you felt like. That's our fault, not God's fault. Now you think of the Word of God, and this is something that I really think we've got to spend a little time on. In fact, we'll have the time to develop this further. Rahab, we're told, recalls in her speech what God did in crossing and getting Israel across the outside. And she's speaking this 40 years after the event. She wasn't probably even born at the time it happened, but she read about it. And she believed it. And she believed it to such an extent that she welcomed these Israeli spies because they were the servants of the Most High God. She wanted to be with that Most High God. And so we have this wonderful story of Rahab and how she went, and here's the testimony, how Yahweh dried up the water from the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites on the other side of Jordan, Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And as soon as we heard these things, our hearts melted, neither did there remain any more courage in anyone because of you. For Yahweh, your God, He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. No other God could do that. She was determined to believe it to the end. You think of Jonah and the fish that God prepared to swallow him. Now, Jonah couldn't survive in the water very long. It's a bit like any of us that were thrown overboard in a storm and we're constantly being submerged. We're going to last a couple minutes until we are starting to breathe water. And we breathe water, it's just a matter of seconds after that before we're going down. God prepared a fish so that wouldn't happen to Jonah. See, God is never limited by time. He uses time. The fish was right there, prepared for when they threw Jonah overboard. And the fish didn't go away and say, well, I'll come back later on and see if Jonah's around. No, the fish didn't think that. The fish was there to obey what God had said. And I think it's really significant to look at the miracle of Jonah in that regard. Similarly, the words of the Lord Jesus Christ demanded that the people had thought about Jonah a little bit. Like you have Jonah in your prophets. You ought to know what he had to say. That's really what Luke 11 is telling us. And while the crowds were thickly gathered together, he began to say, this is an evil generation. It seeks a sign. No sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah the prophet. And the people are wondering, what sign did Jonah the prophet have to show? And if they'd never thought about it, Jesus had thought about it. For as Jonah became a sign to the Ninevites, so also the Son of Man will be to this generation. See, that's how we got to use God's word. We've got to be like Rahab and believe it, even though it happened long before we were born, or at least before we were born. And in this case, there's a prophet that said something that's linked to what is going to happen. Do you know what the prophet did? What happened to him? Well, there's a similarity that's going to happen. But if you don't see the similarity, you're not going to be exercised in spirit by it. So we're compelled to read and to know the Word of God. And of course, with the garden tomb and thinking that the tomb was there and they had to get Jesus buried in a very short time before, the Sabbath closed in on them. And so he was in that tomb just where God wanted him to be for 3 days and 3 nights. Timing, that's God's tool. But I suppose if we could just sort of finish this off with one fantastic event, it would be with Elijah and what he did to the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel. And this is what Elijah said just before the event. He said, "Hear me, O Yahweh, hear me, that this people may know that you are Yahweh God, and that you have turned their hearts back to you again." Then the fire of Yahweh fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now, when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "Yahweh, he is God. Yahweh, he is God." And that's the way they felt, at least till the prophets of Baal were done in by what happened to them afterwards. And people may have thought that now Yahweh, he is the only God. But they soon forgot it. And the worst situation was Ahab, who had this demonstration before his eyes, and it seemed like he had listened to it, and he may have changed because of it, but when he went back to his wife didn't see it, and she wasn't changing, and it seemed like that the miracle just fell apart. You see, it's excitement and disappointment. Excitement and disappointment. It can't be that way for us, brothers and sisters. God gives us certain signs. If we miss it, we've missed it. We don't want to miss things like that. Neither do we want to miss what God has done with these Dead Sea Scrolls. The vindicating Yahweh is something that I think we're called upon to do. He says, "Hold fast what you have till I come." Now, brothers and sisters, you've got to think about that. You've got to think, what is it that we really have to hold fast? What is it that will give us the substance to be well-rooted and not movable when the time comes, maybe far more troubling than we've ever seen? "He who overcomes and keeps my word unto the end, to him will I give power over the nations." It's a trial for each of us to listen what has happened and to adjust our thinking because of it.
Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment in the comment section and let us know what you thought. And make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Please share it and spread the word. Thanks for watching. And remember to come back soon.